An Arab billionaire buys a single mother at an auction to have a child, but what he finds out later surprises him. Before we start the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Layla, a young woman, was struggling to take care of her son, Ian. She had no other options and decided to take part in an unusual auction where women were sold to wealthy men. For her, this was not a choice, but her only chance. Sitting in a corner of the luxurious hall, Layla felt the weight of the decision she had made. Her heart raced, full of fear and uncertainty about what would happen next. But she thought of her son, An, who was being taken care of by her elderly neighbor. The overdue bills, the risk of being evicted, and the nights when An went to bed hungry were the reasons that led her to make this choice. The event organizer, a man in a sharp suit with a forced smile, approached her and gave her some instructions. "Layla, remember to smile, stay calm, and don't make eye contact with the guests," he said before walking away. The hall was filled with men in fancy clothes, watching each woman like they were objects. Layla felt a lump in her throat when her name was called. "Lot number 23, the organizer said in a loud, dramatic voice. Her legs trembled as she walked up to the stage, and the bright lights made it hard for her to see. The heat from the lights made her sweat. She tried to hold her head high, but she could feel all eyes on her. "A true exotic beauty," the organizer continued, making Layla feel even more exposed. The crowd murmured in approval. Suddenly, a deep voice cut through the room. 1 million. The hall fell silent. Everyone turned to see a man with tanned skin and piercing eyes sitting in the back. He had an air of power about him. Karim Alfred, a wealthy Arab businessman, had made the bid. The organizer, surprised at the high bid, repeated the amount to confirm. No one else bid. "Sold," he said with a smile. Layla's legs gave out, but she stayed composed as she stepped down from the stage. Her life had just changed forever. Karim walked toward her, his face serious. "We need to discuss the terms," he said, holding out his hand to lead her. Layla hesitated but followed him into a private room where the future she had sealed on stage would now be decided. The room was large and elegant. Karim motioned for Layla to sit in an armchair. He picked up an envelope from a nearby table and handed it to her. "Here's the contract," he said. "Read it carefully." Layla's hands shook as she took the paper. She read the clauses in silence, her breathing becoming heavier as she reached the main part. "You want me to have a child and then leave it with you?" she asked, her voice shaking. Karim crossed his arms and nodded. "I need an heir. After the child is born, you'll leave. The contract is clear about that." Layla stood up, anger and fear filling her. "I can't do this. I won't abandon my own child." Karim's eyes narrowed, but he spoke calmly. "You knew what you were getting into when you entered the auction. There's no turning back now." "This is wrong," Layla shouted, holding the contract tightly. "You think you can just buy a child and throw the mother away?" Karim stepped forward, his presence taking over the room. "I paid $1 million for you, Layla. This isn't just a whim. Now, you have no choice." Layla felt her heart race. She realized she was trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. Karim placed a pen on the table in front of her. "Sign the contract. Once the baby is born, you'll get the money and you'll be free to go." Layla stared at the contract, her hands trembling with anger and sadness. She thought of An and the sacrifice she was making for his future. Tears filled her eyes, but she held them back. "This isn't right," she whispered, sitting back down. Karim leaned in, his gaze intense. "Right or wrong doesn't matter here. What matters is that you honor the agreement." Layla knew she had no choice. With a heavy heart, she picked up the pen and signed the contract. Karim took the contract. All right, tomorrow morning we'll do the necessary medical exams, and then you'll be taken to my mansion. Get some rest, he said before leaving. Layla was left alone with her thoughts and regrets. She stared at her signature on the contract, feeling like she had sealed her fate. The next day, a limousine arrived at Layla's small apartment. Saying goodbye to Anne was brief and painful. She told him she had to work far away for a few months and promised to call whenever she could. Anne, innocent and unaware, waved goodbye with a confident smile, not knowing what his mother was going through. The ride to the mansion was silent. Layla looked out the window, watching the desert landscape slowly change into modern, luxurious buildings. When they arrived, the mansion was grand, leaving Layla speechless. Tall gates opened to reveal beautiful gardens and a mansion that looked like it came from a fairy tale. Karim was waiting at the entrance with his serious expression. He led her inside and briefly explained the rooms and house rules. "Your privacy will be respected, but I expect you to follow the agreement without any questions," he said, before leaving her with a staff member named Amina. Amina, a kind middle-aged woman, showed Layla to her room. The room was beautifully decorated with soft tones, a big contrast from Layla's old life. On the bed were clothes and accessories chosen for her. "If you need anything, I'll be nearby," Amina said with a smile. Layla thanked her, but felt like a stranger in this place. That night, Layla stood on the balcony of her room, looking at the horizon. Her thoughts went to Anne. The pain of being away from him was unbearable, but she had to believe she was doing what was best for his future. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Karim. "Tomorrow we'll visit my doctor," he told her before leaving. Layla nodded quietly. The weight of her decision grew heavier with each passing moment, but there was no turning back now. The next morning, Layla woke up early. The mansion's silence was unsettling. Her first night there had been sleepless, filled with endless thoughts about what was ahead. The bed was soft, the sheets silky, but the weight of reality made it hard to find peace. Soon, Amina knocked on the door to take her to Karim's doctor. As they walked through the mansion, Layla noticed the luxury around her. Persian rugs on the floors, famous paintings on the walls, and large windows looking out at the well-kept gardens. Layla barely had time to take it all in before getting into the limousine to go to the clinic. The doctor's office was in a modern building in the center of Dubai. Dr. Ibrahim, a calm and reassuring man, greeted Layla with professionalism. After a thorough examination, he confirmed that everything was in good condition to begin the first fertilization process. Layla nodded, trying to hide her unease. Karim stood back, watching quietly, his usual composed self. For him, this was just another step in fulfilling his responsibilities. But for Layla, it was a painful reminder that in 9 months she would have to leave a part of herself behind. Back at the mansion, Layla tried to distract herself by exploring. Every room seemed more luxurious than the last. There was a library with huge shelves, an indoor pool surrounded by marble, and a music room full of exotic instruments. Despite all its beauty, the mansion felt empty, almost lifeless. Layla noticed that although Karim lived in such luxury, his life seemed very lonely. He rarely smiled, and his few acts of kindness felt distant and formal. In the first few days, Karim only interacted with Layla about the contract and kept their discussions strictly business. Layla, on the other hand, felt more and more out of place. She spent her nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about how her son was doing, and her mornings were spent coming to terms with the fact that soon she would carry a child she couldn't keep. In the second week, Karim hosted a formal dinner at the mansion for some of his business partners. Layla was told to dress elegantly and accompany him as part of the agreement. The dress she wore was beautiful, but as she walked down the grand staircase, She felt uncertain. The guests watched her closely, some greeting her politely, while others looked at her in ways that made her feel exposed. Karim, however, stayed by her side the entire time, introducing her as his special guest. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing her discomfort as they stepped away to a quieter corner. "I'm trying to adjust," Layla replied honestly. Karim nodded, but didn't say anything more. For him, social events were just a formality, part of his duties. But for Layla, it was like entering a world she didn't fully understand. After the dinner, Layla went to her room, feeling exhausted. Before going to bed, she called her neighbor to check on Anne. Hearing her son's cheerful voice made her feel comforted, but it also brought tears to her eyes. She missed him so much, but knew she couldn't give in to the temptation to turn back. As the days passed, Layla began to notice small things about Karim that didn't match his strict appearance. He was careful and demanding, but sometimes he showed small moments of kindness. One afternoon, she saw him in the garden, watering a rare plant that seemed special to him. "This plant belonged to my mother," he said, noticing Layla looking at it. She used to say that taking care of it brought peace. For the first time, Layla felt a bit of empathy for Karim. He seemed less like a cold, powerful man and more like someone dealing with his own pain. She realized that even though their reasons for being there were different, both of them carried heavy burdens. Amina, the housekeeper, began talking more to Layla during the quiet afternoons. She shared stories about Karim's life, telling Layla how he had taken on many responsibilities at a young age after his parents passed away. These talks helped Layla understand the man who had seemed impossible to understand before. Even so, the loneliness stayed with her. Layla tried not to get too attached to the mansion or Karim, reminding herself that her time there was limited. Despite the loneliness, Layla found comfort in her walks around the garden and the peaceful nights spent looking at the stars from her balcony. One evening, Karim knocked on her door. He seemed softer than usual, his face less serious. "We need to talk," he said. Layla sat down, expecting more instructions or demands. Instead, Karim seemed unsure, as if looking for the right words. "I know this arrangement is hard for you," he started. "I don't want to make it worse. I just want you to know that despite everything, I respect your courage." Layla was surprised by his words. Karim's kindness was unexpected, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before: vulnerability. The moment was short, but it made her wonder. Maybe Karim wasn't as cold as he seemed. Maybe, behind his tough exterior, he was as hurt as she was. After he left, Layla thought about their conversation. For the first time since coming to the mansion, she felt that there might be a chance, though it was small, that she could find something deeper in their relationship. Life at the mansion continued at a slow pace, but every moment seemed to add more layers to the complicated relationship between Layla and Karim. They were like two pieces of a puzzle, trying to fit together because of the situation that had brought them together. Layla knew that time was passing, and soon she would be carrying Karim's child. The thought scared her, but it also made her curious. Who was the man who had asked her to make such a huge sacrifice? Life at the mansion started to follow a more predictable rhythm. Layla, though still burdened by her decision, started to notice small details about the house and her new routine. The garden became her escape, a place where she could feel the sun and listen to the calm sound of water flowing from the fountains. She noticed that Karim spent a lot of time in the garden too. He didn't try to start conversations, but Layla could tell he was always watching her. There was a quiet tension between them, something they both felt but chose not to talk about. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, Layla saw Karim carefully trimming a tree. When he noticed her, he briefly looked up before returning to his task, making it clear he wasn't expecting to talk. "Do you enjoy gardening?" Layla asked, breaking the silence. "It helps me organize my thoughts," Kareem replied, not looking at her. Layla felt that there might be a small opening in his thoughts. He was reserved, but not completely closed off. She decided to respect his space, but couldn't stop wondering about what was behind his strict exterior. That evening, during dinner, Kareem surprised Layla by sitting down at the table with her. Until then, she had always eaten alone, either in her room or in a quiet corner of the house. Kareem seemed calm, but his presence felt heavy, and Layla couldn't ignore it. "Are you adjusting?" he asked, breaking the silence as he poured himself a glass of wine. "I think so, as much as I can," Layla replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Kareem studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand what she was thinking. "I know it's not easy, but I hope you understand that all of this is necessary." Layla wanted to ask, necessary for whom? But she kept the question to herself. Instead, she just nodded and continued eating in silence. There was something in the way he spoke that made her think that, beneath his tough exterior, he was carrying some emotional burden. As the weeks went by, Layla began to notice small acts of kindness from Kareem. He was quiet, but thoughtful. One day, after she casually mentioned missing certain foods from her homeland, Amir brought her a tray of food. "Mr. Kareem asked me to make these," Amir explained with a smile. Layla was surprised, but didn't say anything. It was hard to figure out what Kareem really wanted. He was cold and distant, but sometimes it seemed like he cared about her well-being in small ways. One morning, Layla found a collection of books neatly arranged on her bedside table. Among them were novels and stories she had mentioned in passing. She couldn't help but feel touched, realizing that Kareem had paid attention to the little things she said. One day, Layla went to the mansion's music room. The door was slightly open, and she heard soft piano music coming from inside. Curious, she walked in and saw Kareem playing the piano, a skill she never expected from him. "You play the piano?" she asked, surprised. Kareem looked up, clearly startled to be caught playing. "My mother taught me when I was a child," he said, pulling his hands away from the keyboard. "It's beautiful," Layla said, stepping closer. He looked away, unsure of how to respond to the compliment. In that brief moment, Layla saw a side of him that wasn't so cold. He seemed to have a deep emotional connection to his past. Another time, Layla was in the garden when a small bird fell from a tree, injured. Without thinking, she knelt down and gently picked up the bird. "What will you do with it?" Kareem asked, walking up behind her. "I'll take care of it until it's strong enough to fly again," Layla replied, determined. Kareem didn't say anything, but she could see a look of admiration in his eyes. That simple act of kindness seemed to affect him more than she expected. The nights at the mansion were lonely, but Layla found comfort in small routines. She enjoyed wandering the quiet hallways, amazed by the mansion's grand design. One evening she crossed paths with Kareem in the hallway. He looked tired, his face softer than usual. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Layla hesitated before replying, "Sometimes it's hard, with so much on my mind." Kareem nodded, as if he understood. To her surprise, he invited her to have tea in the library. Surrounded by books, they talked for longer than they ever had before. In that moment, Layla started to see beyond Kareem's cold exterior. The staff at the mansion noticed the changes too. Amir, who had always been kind, now seemed to treat Layla like a friend. Even Kareem appeared more relaxed around her, though he still kept his formality. There was something different in the way he looked at her, as if he was starting to see her in a new light. Layla and Kareem began to feel less isolated. Despite the nature of their agreement, Layla found small moments of connection in the mansion that once felt empty. But the reality of her situation still hung over her. Every day she reminded herself that all of this was temporary. As she started to notice changes in their relationship, Layla knew she needed to prepare for the challenges ahead. Kareem was a complex man, and she was only beginning to understand the layers of his personality. Deep down, she knew that their paths were starting to cross on a deeper level. The days passed by, and Layla found herself becoming more involved in the mansion's daily routine. Even though she tried to keep her emotions in check, small moments with Kareem began to make an impact on her. He too showed more interest in getting to know her, though he held back. One evening, as they walked through the garden under the moonlight, Kareem suddenly stopped. "Layla, I want you to know that despite everything, you've shown me things I didn't see before," he said quietly. Layla was surprised. "Like what?" she asked. "That there's more to life than just obligations and contracts," Kareem said sincerely. "Sometimes you need to make space for something new." Layla's heart skipped a beat. She knew she was starting to fall for him, but she also remembered that the contract was still an obstacle. The staff began to notice the change in their relationship. Amir, who had always been observant, started treating Layla with more warmth, almost like she was already a permanent member of the household. Other staff members exchanged knowing glances whenever they saw Kareem and Layla together. Still, Layla couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. With each passing day, the end of the contract grew closer. The fear of losing everything, including the bond she had built with Kareem, weighed heavily on her. One afternoon, as Layla was reading in the library, Kareem walked in with a serious look on his face. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Layla put the book down, sensing the tension in the room. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice anxious. Kareem sat down across from her, his hands resting on the table. "We need to talk about the future. I know the contract says what happens after the baby is born, but things have changed." Layla held her breath. She had expected this moment, but she wasn't ready. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I want to consider other options," Kareem said firmly. "I don't want you to just leave." Layla's heart raced, but she wasn't sure how to respond. What he was suggesting was what she had hoped for, but she was afraid to get her hopes up. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means we need to figure out how to make this work together," Kareem said, his voice steady but full of care. Those words echoed in Layla's mind. She knew things were complicated, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, Layla and Kareem started talking more openly about their feelings and what they expected from each other. They both realized they were dealing with emotions much deeper than they had planned. Layla began to imagine a future with Kareem and her son, and Kareem started to see the possibility of creating a real family. But they still faced difficulties. Kareem was troubled by his family's expectations, and Layla struggled to accept that her life would never be the same. But together, they found strength in each other. One quiet evening, as they watched the stars from the terrace, Kareem turned to Layla and said something she would never forget. "I didn't know what love was until you came into my life," he said softly. Tears fell from Layla's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. She realized that, despite all the struggles, something special had grown between them. The mansion, which once felt cold and lonely, now seemed like it could be a home. The bond they shared was stronger than any contract. As the sun began to set over the mansion, Layla sat at the piano in the music room, a place that had become one of her few peaceful spots. She lightly touched the keys, playing a soft, sad tune when Kareem quietly entered. "Did you teach yourself to play?" he asked, interrupting the calm music. Layla looked up, surprised, but smiled faintly. My mother taught me when I was little. It was something we shared, even during tough times. Kareem nodded and moved closer. He sat next to her on the piano bench and watched her fingers move over the keys. "You're talented," he said softly. Layla felt the tension between them but didn't say anything. Kareem stayed quiet for a while before speaking again. "Layla, I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through and how we got to this point." She stopped playing and looked at him. The serious look in his eyes made her realize he was about to say something important. "What did you conclude?" she asked, trying to stay calm. Kareem took a deep breath before answering. "I can't keep ignoring the feelings between us, but I also know that my past and my family's expectations have always been in the way." Layla felt a mix of hope and fear. Kareem rarely talked about his struggles, so hearing this showed that he was ready to deal with his past. Later that evening, Kareem invited her for a walk in the garden. The cool breeze and the soft rustling of the leaves created a peaceful atmosphere, but the conversation they were about to have weighed heavily in the air. "My father was very strict," Kareem began as they walked together. "He thought family honor was the most important thing. I spent my life trying to meet his expectations, and that shaped how I see the world." Layla listened carefully, feeling the pain in his words. "When my mother passed away, he became even more distant," Kareem continued. "He focused only on control and making sure everything stayed according to the plan." "And that's why you feel you need an heir?" Layla asked gently. Kareem stopped and turned to her. "Partly. But deep down, I think I've always been afraid of being alone." Layla felt a sharp pang in her chest. She knew what it felt like to be lonely, but hearing this from Kareem made her realize that beneath his tough exterior, he too carried deep emotional pain. The next day, Kareem invited Layla to the desert. They left early, and soon they were surrounded by endless golden sand. When they arrived at a quiet oasis, Kareem told her it was a special place for him, a place he went to when he needed clarity. "This place reminds me that even in the middle of the desert there's life," he said as they walked near the clear water. Layla felt a deep connection to the moment, sensing that it was an important step in their journey. They sat under a palm tree, and Kareem spoke again. "I've spent so much time stuck in the past, living by the expectations of others. I never gave myself the chance to figure out what I truly want." Layla looked at him, feeling the honesty in his words. "What do you want now?" she asked, her heart beating faster. Kareem turned to her, his eyes bright under the sun. "I want to live differently. I want to build something real, something not defined by contracts or obligations." Layla felt tears welling up, but managed to hold them back. Those words were everything she had hoped to hear, yet she knew there were still uncertainties between them. When they returned to the mansion, the atmosphere between them felt lighter, but both knew they still had unresolved issues. Layla spent her nights thinking about her decisions and how they would affect her son. She knew that to move forward, she would need to face her own fears. One night, as she looked at the starry sky from the balcony, Kareem joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Layla and stood beside her in silence for a while. "You know, Layla," he said quietly, "I never thought I'd meet someone who would make me question everything I believed." She looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. "You've shown me that it's possible to have more in life, that there's room for things beyond responsibilities and expectations," he added. Layla gave a faint smile, her eyes full of emotion. "You've also shown me that it's possible to find strength even in the hardest times," she replied. "I wouldn't have come this far without you." In the following days, Kareem began making clear changes in how they interacted. He reviewed the contract, and though the clauses about the baby's future stayed the same, he made it clear he wanted to find a solution that would be fair to both of them. Layla felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but she could sense they were finally heading in the right direction. The mansion staff noticed the changes. Ahmad, usually cold, had become warmer, and Layla seemed more confident and relaxed. One afternoon, Amina, always observant, said to Layla, "I always knew Mr. Ahmad had a good heart. He just needed someone to help him find it." Layla smiled, feeling grateful for how things had changed. But even with the positive changes, Layla knew the future was still uncertain. She and Ahmad had to keep facing their fears and work together to build something real. But for the first time, she felt hopeful, a chance that love could overcome the challenges. As the sun set over the mansion, Layla and Karim sat together on the terrace, watching the horizon. They both knew the future would be difficult, but they were ready to face it together. The atmosphere in the mansion had lightened, but the weight of the future still hung over them. They both knew they were at a crossroads, and tough decisions would need to be made. One morning, Karim asked Layla to meet him in his office. The room, usually imposing, felt different this time, more intimate. He asked her to sit, and Layla felt a mix of curiosity and nervousness. "I've been thinking a lot about our agreement and everything that has happened since you arrived," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Layla kept her gaze fixed on him, waiting for him to continue. "When we made this contract, my only focus was getting an heir for the family. But things have changed," Karim said, clasping his hands on the desk. "I can't ignore the feelings that have developed between us." Layla's heart raced. This was what she had hoped for, but she was afraid of what would happen next. "And what does that mean?" she asked quietly. "It means I want to find a way to make this work for both of us. I want you to stay, not because of the contract, but because we want to be together," Karim said, his words filled with care. Layla felt a glimmer of hope, but she knew things wouldn't be simple. There were many layers to their situation, and she needed to be sure they were both ready to face them. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the gardens, Layla thought about what Karim had said. Despite her feelings for him, the reality of her situation was harsh. Her son, An, was in another city, and the contract said she would leave once the baby was born. Later, Layla found Amina near the fountain and decided to talk. "Amina, do you think I can trust Karim?" Layla asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Amina looked at her, surprised, but replied with honesty. "Mr. Karim is a man of his word. He doesn't make promises he doesn't intend to keep. But he's also human, Layla. Like you, he's trying to find a balance between what he feels and what he has to do." Layla listened to Amina's words, feeling a little more at ease, though still uncertain. The next day, Karim invited Layla to visit an orphanage he supported. When they arrived, the children greeted them with laughter and hugs. Layla felt a warm feeling inside as she watched Karim interact with them, his usual seriousness replaced by a gentler, more caring side. "You really care about them," Layla said, watching the children play. "They remind me that life is more than responsibilities and business. There's beauty in simplicity," Karim replied, looking at her with intensity. Those words deeply affected Layla. For the first time she felt that Karim was truly ready to change, to let go of some of the control he held so tightly, in exchange for something real. Back at the mansion, Karim decided to revise the contract. He gathered his lawyers and changed some clauses, making sure Layla would have more freedom and the right to keep in touch with An after the baby was born. When he gave Layla the new contract, she was visibly moved. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, holding the paper with trembling hands. "Because I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I don't want you to feel trapped. I want you to stay because you trust me, not because you have to," Karim said. Tears streamed down Layla's face, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. Days passed, and the connection between Kareem and Layla grew stronger. What had once been formal conversations turned into deeper, more natural exchanges. They shared their stories, dreams and fears, building a strong foundation for whatever came next. One night, as they sat together on the terrace, Kareem said something that caught Layla off guard. "Layla, I want to meet An," he said. Layla was surprised and stayed silent for a moment, processing his words. "Are you sure?" she asked carefully. "Absolutely. He's part of you, and I want to know every part of your life," Kareem replied. Layla's heart warmed. Kareem's willingness to include An in their lives showed his commitment to building something real. The trip to visit An was filled with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Kareem stayed calm, but Layla could tell he was nervous. When they arrived, An ran into Layla's arms, joyfully shouting, "Mommy!" Kareem watched with a soft smile. When Layla introduced An to him, the boy looked at Kareem with curiosity. "Are you my mum's friend?" An asked innocently. Kareem knelt down to meet An's eyes. "Yes, I am, and I hope we can be friends too," he replied. An smiled, and Layla felt a mixture of relief and happiness. The connection between Kareem and An felt natural, like An could sense that Kareem was a safe and kind presence. Back at the mansion, Layla started to feel that she was finally building something real. Her relationship with Kareem was no longer just about the contract. It was based on trust and real feelings. But she knew the future would still require courage and patience. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars, Kareem held Layla's hand and said, "I know we still have a lot to face, but I want you to know I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." Layla felt her heart fill with hope. For the first time, she truly believed they had a future together. Life at the mansion was starting to feel familiar, but the bond between Layla and Kareem was still growing. After meeting with An, something changed. Kareem became more attentive and present, as if he was beginning to understand the life Layla had before coming into his world. One morning, while they had coffee on the terrace, Kareem said something unexpected. "I want An to live here," he said, his voice calm and firm. Layla was shocked. "Are you serious?" she asked, still processing what he had said. "Yes. If we're going to build something together, I want him to be part of it from the start," Kareem replied. Layla's heart raced. Having her son close was everything she had hoped for, but doubts still lingered. "What about the contract?" she asked carefully. Kareem took a deep breath before answering. "The contract doesn't have to stop us. We can change the terms so An can stay here without changing anything important." Layla stayed quiet, moved by Kareem's willingness to make changes for her. It was a gesture that meant more than words could say. Preparations for An's arrival started right away. Kareem asked Amina to prepare a room for him, decorated with things Layla suggested. She wanted the room to feel warm and familiar, with touches that reminded An of the home he had before. The day An arrived, Layla felt anxious. When the mansion doors opened, An ran into her arms, and she hugged him tightly. "This place is huge, Mom," he said, his eyes wide as he looked around. Kareem, who had been watching from a distance, slowly walked over to them. He knelt to An's level and stretched out his hand. "Welcome, An. I hope you like it here," he said. An shook his hand with a shy smile. "Thank you, sir." Kareem smiled, and Layla noticed that even though he was serious, he was really trying to connect with An. The first few days were full of adjustments. An quickly got used to the mansion's luxury, exploring every room and asking many questions. Kareem, though quiet, patiently answered each one. One night, as Layla tucked An into bed, he asked, "Mom, is Mr. Kareem a good man?" Layla was surprised by the question, but answered honestly, "Yes, he is. He's learning to be better every day." Ain smiled, happy with the answer, and soon fell asleep. Layla sat beside him, watching his peaceful face. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was on the right path. Over time, Karim and An started bonding. They spent afternoons playing chess or walking in the garden. Karim, who had once seemed distant, began showing a more caring side. One day, while they were walking, An stopped and looked up at Karim. "Do you like my mom?" he asked, with the innocent curiosity of a child. Karim chuckled, surprised by the question. "I do," he said sincerely. "She's a very special woman." An smiled and kept walking, leaving Karim with a soft smile. That simple moment showed that their bond was growing. One afternoon, Layla found Karim in his office looking over some papers. She entered slowly, holding a cup of tea. "Can I interrupt?" she asked. Karim looked up and smiled. "Always." She sat on the nearby sofa, watching him focus on his work. There was something comforting about seeing him so dedicated. "You're working so hard for us," she said, breaking the silence. Karim set his pen down and looked at her. "Because you're worth it." The simplicity of his words made Layla's heart race. She knew that despite all the challenges, she was building something real with him. The months passed quickly, and the atmosphere in the Al-Fed mansion changed. Layla and Karim's relationship grew stronger, and Iman became a very important part of their home. As they went through new experiences together, the excitement of the baby's arrival brought them even closer. One evening, while Layla rested on the terrace, she felt some discomfort in her stomach. Thinking it was just another pregnancy symptom, she tried to ignore it, but the pain became stronger. Worried, she called for Amira, who rushed to Karim. "Layla is going into labor," Amira said urgently. Karim quickly ran to the bedroom, where he found Layla struggling with the contractions. "We're going to the hospital now," he said firmly, holding her hand. The drive to the hospital was tense. Karim, usually calm, couldn't hide his worry. He held Layla's hand tightly, speaking softly to comfort her. "Everything will be okay, Leah. I'm here with you," he said again and again. Once they arrived, the medical team took over, but Karim stayed by Layla's side throughout the labor. He held her hand, offering support every step of the way. Hours later, the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. Karim looked down at the tiny baby boy in his arms, his eyes filled with tears. "He's beautiful, Layla. Perfect," he said, his heart overflowing with love. Layla smiled, tired but happy. It was a new chapter in their lives. A few days after the birth, Layla was resting in bed, holding the baby when Karim walked in with an envelope. He sat beside her, looking serious but with a warm look in his eyes. "Layla, I need to tell you something," he said as he opened the envelope. "This contract is no longer valid." To her surprise, Karim tore the contract into pieces and let them fall to the floor. "Everything I've done has been for you and our family. I don't want anything, not even a contract, to define our future." Karim held Layla's hands and looked at her with love. "Layla, you've brought light into my life. You've taught me what love is and what it means to have a family. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, raising our children and facing whatever comes." He opened a small velvet box, showing a delicate ring with a diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Layla's face, and her heart raced with joy. She could hardly speak. "Yes, Karim, I will," she said. An, who had been watching from the door, ran over and hugged them. "We're going to be a real family," he said, smiling. Karim lifted him into his arms, and they celebrated the start of a new chapter in their lives. The months before the wedding were full of happiness and planning. Layla wanted the ceremony to reflect both her heritage and the love they shared, and Karim made sure to fulfill her every wish. The mansion was transformed into a fairy tale setting with beautiful flowers, soft lights, and a mix of Arabic and Western traditions. The big day finally arrived. The sun shone brightly as Layla walked down the aisle in a beautiful white dress with gold details. Anne, wearing a small formal suit, proudly carried the rings. As Layla walked toward him, Karim's eyes filled with emotion. "You look breathtaking," he whispered, holding her hands. Their vows were simple, but deeply meaningful. They promised love, respect, and partnership, sealing their commitment with a kiss that made the guests clap with joy. The reception was a celebration of love and different cultures. Traditional Arabic music mixed with melodies from Layla's homeland, creating a warm and festive atmosphere. Anne ran around, excited about his new baby brother and the new life they were building together. "This is the start of everything I've ever dreamed of," Layla said, watching the scene beside Karim. "And it's just the beginning," he replied, holding her hand. By the end of the night, under a starry sky, Layla and Karim danced together, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating a love that had overcome all obstacles. It was the perfect ending to a journey that started unexpectedly but grew into a beautiful